Okay, it's January 10th. This video is for 2366 chipper. This is the chipper. VIN is 1936. It's a 4-letter VIN. Here, walk right through it. This is the door we open up where the controller is. We take the controller out, close the door, stick the controller in the square. There. The controller has a long lead. You can stand out here and operate it. We open this up. Switches. These switches are for lights. Light goes into this hole and it shoots light into the trailer. I open this up. First door. The battery shut off. We have 4 batteries. The batteries have to be hooked up 24 volts. There's my switch. Positive to negative to positive to negative. 24 volts. And then you can gang up as many batteries as you want. So we have 2 extras. Positive to positive, negative to negative, positive to positive, negative to negative. So this is the 24 volts. And then you just hook them up parallel, the other 2 batteries. If you say, I'm saying this because if you hook up the batteries, like one of my guys did once, positive to negative, and like a truck would be hooked up, and hook them all in parallel, it will be hooking up 12 volts, and it will not turn very good at all. With all new batteries, it might start, but you'll be thinking the batteries are no good, and because it's operating a 24 volt starter at 12 volts, it works, but it doesn't work very well. So he was telling me the batteries were all no good, they were all new, and that was what that was. That's why I'm making this video, to try to get rid of some of the things that have happened over time here. We had a time where the chipper wouldn't start, and then they ended up burning out the starter motor, and it was just hooked up 12 volts. Now it's 24. So we're going to start it. We'll turn the master on and just push the button to start it. I'm not going to start it now because it makes a lot of noise. And here's where I'm going to go through some controls. This chipper was modified to control the speeds of the top drum and the bottom drum separately for 2 reasons: to synchronize it and to slow it down to make microchips. Now, we don't use that very often anymore for microchips, so we keep this on pretty much full, right? This is the way it operates, with this one here and this one here, pointing to the bolt. Is the way that we worked out, where it works just fine. It's a little too much, and this is a little too little, and you can slow them down to make finer chips, but we don't need to anymore. This valve gets shut off. This is up, and then that shoots the pressure, blocks the return, and runs the return pressure over to this block, where you can operate the legs and the chute manually. And this is with the controller. We're going to operate the chute with these buttons once that's live. If that's not live, nothing's going to happen with the chute in and out and turning the chute, or the legs going down. So we have to make this, we have to liven this bank up here. And this is a modification that should get changed at some point. This was all about the microchipper. We had a bore. We had to make tiny little chips. We ended up doing all this. This should be changed for the electric valve, which I have. Because whenever you shut this off, you completely block the flow. So now when you operate something, everything's fine. If you sit here with this shut off and these maxed out, which you have to do, you max these 2 out, and you have this shut off like this, you completely block the flow. So it's over, putting over the regulator valve right off the pump up there at about 2,500 pounds of pressure. It's working the belts really hard, and it's working everything hard. Everything's heating up. So that, if this was hooked up properly with the electric valve, you'd have the switch so that when you turn the switch to operate any items like this chute, the same switch is a 3-sided switch inside. So the switch at the same time it operates the chute to turn, it opens this valve, closes this valve to liven up the bank here by blocking off the return. And then instantly, the switch is instant acting. So as soon as you stop operating, the switch goes back to normal. So you need to operate this quick. That's the point. Right now, the way it is, I wasn't going to change it because I didn't want to make a mess. We haven't used this since it was set up for microchips. If someone were to use this now, which we've done, it runs fine. It really should be taken all apart. And this was put here for convenience, but it belongs up there. The electric one can go up top. When I have that valve, it should be put on. You start it up, you get it going, you make sure there's air pressure. If anything goes wrong with the air compressor, which it has a few times, I think it's still original compressor, we're going to have trouble. When you start getting your load on it, it's going to slip the clutches. It's an air clutch. It has a truck airbag inside there, and it's going to need at least 60 pounds of pressure. It should be 100. And we'll take this and just bump it up a little bit to get the wheel going. 5 tons of wheel, so we get a little bit. We don't just put it right in usually. Although it won't stall, it tries to stall. It's a lot of work. So we'll bump it a little bit, get the wheel going a little bit more, and then flip it right in. And we'll keep an eye on the pressure all the time. This is set up so you can pop this off from the air compressor and put any source you want if anything ever goes wrong with the air pressure. It has a few times this thing vibrates and shakes so much. There's so much going on. Twice now the air compressor has had valves go bad in the head of it. And I suspect it's from the jumping so much when it's working hard. Or it just could be old. I think it might need a new compressor. So, we've got to have this full pressure. If we don't have it, we just used to keep an air compressor around. Anything going on with the compressor, we'd fix it when we get a chance, and we'd hook an air line from a hose from a truck or a portable compressor in my tool truck. Any way you want to do that. We come up here. I'm going to climb up here. Changing the knives. Everything here is cool. We're going to take the 3 bolts off the top. 1, 2, 3. I keep them very tight. And the knives have to be extremely tight. My gun is 1,200 foot-pounds, and I give it all it has. And you won't break them. But if you have them loose, if they're loose at all, the knife slip out and it'll snap the anvil. You could snap a knife, the knife goes through and it causes a really bad day. So we don't fool around with tightening the knives, and we keep them really clean. We get them out, we clean all behind them. The dust from the wood can get behind the knives. You put the new knives in, if there's any wood behind them, it'll work its way loose. And the knife will slip, come out, knife breaks, knife goes through the machine. Sometimes it shoots through the steel. This has all new steel on it, so it'll probably just rattle around in there and cause a lot of damage. So you really got to tighten those bolts up seriously. And there's another thing: if this machine doesn't have a guard on the belts, and even if it did, we cover them up when it's going to be sloppy, slushy weather and it's going to freeze again. But if ice gets on the bottom of the belts, as soon as you start it, it'll flip the belts. A couple of them will jump off the outside. It's happened a few times now. You'll have a really bad day. It takes about 6 hours to put the belts back on. And to put the belts on, you're not going to use these bolts like it would appear. It would appear you'd loosen these 4 up and just turn this bolt to slide the carriage. In real life, that carriage doesn't slide. So you have to put 2 20-ton jacks underneath with blocks. You work from underneath. You block it on an angle, and you jack 20-ton jacks on each side of it to push it back as after you loosen up the nuts here. These things will not, they don't have enough power. You can see that's marked because we had somebody try to turn this and it did turn the belts over. And I marked it, we pushed it back, put the belts back on, and adjusted them up again. Lined them up with a straight edge because you have adjustments on each end of the carriage. So if it's crooked, you have more troubles. We're going to make sure the belts are straight, obviously. So going around here, wanted to say that about the air pressure. I want to say one more thing here before I go around. This is right leg, left leg chute for travel. It's folded up. Right now it has a brace on it, so I can't operate it. And this top valve, which has a pin in it, isn't used very much. It's if you want to lift up the back drum, you pull it. It lifts up the back drum to work on it. You want to block it really good so you don't kill yourself. When you push it, it sends pressure over to the accumulator tank, and that's the down pressure for the back feed drums. The down pressure is set at 500. That usually works pretty good. If you set it up at 1,000 and the wood gets stuck or the knives are dull, it'll turn into a grinder. It'll grind the wood and make a big mess out of the wood. You just need to have sharp knives. If you put it too light, obviously it's not going to squeeze the wood tight enough. And they didn't want you to mess with it. Some chippers have a control when a guy can control it. And this one works fine, but you have to keep that about 500 pounds of pressure. Right now the wheel's down. If you lift it up, it'll be nice and high. Someone can crawl right in there. What you need to do, if this thing stops chipping good on the brush, it's not the anvil, it's the throat. And the throat had an adjustment when the machine was new. You can move the whole entire machine forward here. You loosen all these bolts and move the whole throat closer to the wheel. Now that's kind of a silly idea. This is here. They cut this with a torch. They'll cut this with a torch. And that's what they tell you to do in the factory. And some of you guys who have more experience, like we had this chipper running for 10 years or so, it's a lot better. Just crawl in there and start welding metal, and until you have the throat built up nice and straight to the wheel. If you get in there and turn it, you'll know what I mean. You turn the wheel around with your hand. You set up a board here. So when the welder guy lays in there with a light, and you get all set up with your wire feed and some small pieces of metal, because it has a lot of shapes to it. You'll turn the wheel around and get it so the axle will, the knife will have no space between the throat. If there's any space, it'll take a stick. It'll break the stick off, wing it around, and throw the stick right out the chute without chipping it. And you'll have a pile of sticks in your load. Someone at the factory might tell you this, to get a new anvil and tighten the anvil, and that's what rookies do, and it doesn't work. It's not the anvil. The anvil can be tight or loose, and that changes the size of the chip more than dealing with the sticks. This has good brakes on it. I wanted to say that this is another issue with these chippers. The big one is this sprocket here, which right now can be changed. You can see it's got the loop on it. The teeth are looped. If you looked at a new one, you'd see how bad it is to see the loops on it. And this is a simple change. You cut the weld off, slide it on, and put a little tack weld to hold it in. And the key holds it for drive. No bolts or anything. It used to have a collar on it, but this is a weld on, and it's made to be welded on. It's fine. You just slide it on and weld it. This is super loose because it's a little worn out now. It's ready to be changed. And it's if you tighten it, it has so much power now, this chipper, to turn. That drum is the most demanding of the whole machine, the force on that. So it has so much power, it'll ride up on the worn sprocket and pull the chain enough to snap it. You get into a big piece of wood. So if you start snapping a lot of chains, it's not the chain so much, it's the sprocket. Also, the chain needs to be the H chain. It has to be heavy duty. There's two chains and one's almost twice as thick of metal on it. H chain and a new sprocket, and that's fine. If you start breaking chains, it's not anything weird, it's the sprocket. And we've changed that a few times. They'll last about 100 loads maybe, which is a lot. And then you start breaking chains. And you'll, we always keep chains around. Sometimes they break anyway, because you have the pressure turned up. Sometimes we turn the pressure back a little bit if the chains are causing too much trouble. We can set it down at 1800. It's up to about 2200 now. Rebuilt engine, everything on it. One time the fan went bad, bumped into the pulley, the drive pulley for the pumps, and the fan broke. The fan is so heavy duty it didn't hurt the fan a bit. It broke a piece off the pulley. I think there's still a chip off it, and it doesn't make any difference. It still works fine with a chip off the pulley, but that was because the fan was bad. Now it has a new bearing on it, and it wasn't always the fan. It was the fan combination of a job we were on chipping cedar. It was super dusty, and the radiator had to be cleaned out several times a day. When I wasn't on the job, my guys were not doing that. When I came, the radiator was completely plugged, and that sprocket was busted, or the pulley, and it was a combination of the bearing bad on the fan and the radiator being completely plugged up with crap. So we cleaned the radiator and put a new fan on it, new bearings and everything. So here's the clutch. The clutch there's several pieces. It's a huge clutch. It has a airbag, which is similar to the truck suspension airbag inside of it. Really simple clutch, very expensive if you smoke it. The whole thing is, but the parts are relatively cheap. And the airbag can be replaced, and the discs, the material, the shoes in it can be replaced. So those are important things. That sprocket can go bad. If you break chains, that sprocket has to get changed. And then a new chain, and we'll put a new chain sprocket. Right now there's a brand new chain in the toolbox here for that, and some extra links. That's the most troublesome thing on this chipper, but it's not that big a deal. It's the price of a couple loads of wood for a new sprocket and chain and everything, and then you're done with it for about 100 loads or so. And we've done it with the guy who had it before. He would chip 200 or 300, and he would just keep breaking chains all day long. And just some people just do that and go super easy on it. You can get it to not break them and turn the pressure down. Things like that. That's got 150 gallons of oil. We keep it full because in the summertime especially, oil gets so hot that there's no cooling. The cooling is in the volume of oil. There's no oil cooler on this. People have added them, but you don't really need it if you keep that full of oil. By the time you get done with the load, I'd say the guys who put the oil coolers on are the ones who are going to run this steady all day long, every day. And most people run it for one load and then another load. And we've done like 4 or 5 loads a day, and that's about it. And usually there's plenty of time in between. We never run this thing steady for 8 hours or anything. We load it. It takes about a half hour at the most, usually, to load. And then it'll be off for a few hours while the truck's delivering. Things like that. As long as you have that full of oil. I never had it overheat yet. Didn't have a need for a cooler. I guess they figured that too, because they don't have one on it. Some of the Morbarks have coolers on them, and I've seen people put them on these Precisions. So I'm going over here, and I'm going to say another important thing. That chute is up now. It's usually down. It usually doesn't matter much if it's down and the deflector is pointing down so nothing can get in it. That's fine. But if it's not down, if it's up like it is now, I'm going to cover that. I'm going to put a tarp over that for sure. I'm going to cover the belts tonight and put a cover over that hole, because a little stitch in time thing is going to save you a lot of hassle. If that fills up with slush, salt, or water, or any kind of material from traveling, if you travel especially, the snow and Snow can go flying in there, kind of fill up the bottom half of where the wheel is, the bottom of the tray there, and that'll melt down a little bit, it freeze up, and there's no way the wheel's going to turn. When you go to start it, if you can get it started, it'll go against the clutch. The clutches will be slipping. The wheel will be the belts will roll a little bit when you start it every time. You can see them moving. If you don't see them move at all, and it starts, you're going to have the belt starting to try to slip, and you're going to have the clutch start to just slipping, and there's no way to get it in. If you get it in and try to get it turning, you're going to have a lot of trouble with it. That wheel's not going to move. The next thing you have to do is get some big salamanders, and if it's cold like it is out here now, you'd have to put a skirting around it, which has happened before. We'll put a skirting of styrofoam board and put 2-3 salamanders under it for a few hours. It's a lot of metal there until it completely melts all the metal out. I have a big plumber's torch we put on it underneath also, and it's just a lot of hassle for not covering up the end of the chute. So you make sure the chute's covered up. It's all sealed up. It's got all new metal on it, so it won't leak. There was an issue once when the metal was thin on the top, where rain would get in there and then it would freeze. So you had to tarp the whole chute. But now it's all sealed up, and there's only, obviously, when it's up like this, it's ready to get filled right up. If we had some snow tonight and rain and it melted a little bit, and then it refroze again, the wheel doesn't have very much clearance to the bottom. Actually almost nothing from about a 1/4 inch. So if there's any more than a 1/4 inch of stuff in the bottom of that, the shroud where the wheel is, it's going to freeze and lock the wheel up. So we keep that clean. Just simple stuff that's very important to keep the belts covered, keep that chute covered. There's an engine heater cord there. Another thing, it's a big engine, K19, 19 liter. It's a ship engine. I'm putting trains and ships, and it's a lot of metal. I think it's 4,500 pounds or so. It's 5,000 pounds of steel. So if that's cold, that's a lot to do to get things moving in that engine. And I've been an engine mechanic for a long time when I was younger. So I can't stand to start that thing cold on a cold day. So we have an engine heater on it, and I'll put it to the generator of a little Honda. And I'll usually come in a half hour ahead of time, at least, maybe even an hour. While you're doing other things, first thing I would do on a job is plug the chipper in. And then a half hour later, it's got plenty of heat there. Warms it up kind of nice. Could use ether once in a while. It usually doesn't need it. It has all new batteries in it now. If the batteries aren't new, I might give a little shot of ether to it. Usually doesn't need ether. Those valves have gone bad, but they haven't gone bad in a long time, so they're pretty good now. We mounted them better so they don't bounce as much. This chipper has different metal pieces all around it. You see a square piece there, a round one there, other square here, this square sticking out. There's several pieces. This one here. Someone might wonder what all these brackets are around this chipper. It used to have no cover on the engine. That was all built on. That cover wasn't on the engine, and in this bad environment with all this snow, we used to have a canopy that would pop in there, pop the brackets into all these spots, and there would be a roof, kind of like a garage over the chipper. We even had sides on it so we could heat it up and keep the chipper warm if we wanted to. So we used to keep the chipper all the way. Oh, there's an ambulance. Huh, that's neat. There's my filler buncher. So we used to keep the chipper all nice and dry and warm, and keep the snow and slop off the engine that way. Now we have this hood, so it doesn't matter that much now. And if somebody was to put the right shroud on the belts, it wouldn't matter so much, but it can still get between this expanded metal. It could still fly in there. If it was windy rain got in there and then froze on the belts, I wouldn't start it. I always look at the belts before I start it, because It's going to be, well, if you're pretty good, you can do it in 4 hours maybe. Somebody first time is probably going to take them an 8-hour day to put those belts back on. So it's nothing to fool around with. You want to make sure those belts are kept covered. It takes about 5 minutes to put the tarp on it, on the belts, and cover up the chute. These chains last forever on the top. They don't do much work. I don't think they've ever been changed with us. These things are fine too. They finished breaking off. A few of those knobs have broken off, and I haven't had one break off in a long time. So we kind of leave them. I don't know why they put so many knobs on. Whoever did it, I don't think they're so necessary, but they are real trouble if they get in. And another thing I have to say, we took the lights off. This is 1.5 inch steel plates to push with a skidder. You can push this thing like anything with a dozer, a skidder, or anything. It's just a super thick steel in the back of this thing. But underneath the wheels, this will fill up, and someone else can put their opinion on it. I would cut this off of there if I was going to continue to run this chipper. We've had other chippers with no plate in there, and it worked out better. And I saw another person, smart guy, put a hinge plate so it could drop down and up underneath there. So you can drop it down at your option. Right now it's all in place. It's got this little space between the bottom wheel. And when you start getting into some hard to chip wood, it puts out too much garbage. There's too much wood, bark and pieces of wood that fills right up, and it starts to jam up the wheels, and that'll cause the chains to snap too. So we keep this. We have a little tool, and each time, at least once per load, sometimes more if we're chipping certain kinds of wood, we'll get the tool in there and clean that out to keep the space, so it doesn't pack up tight and make the wheels, the drum wheels, work too hard. It'll pack right in there. It's the excess junk. So we keep that clean. If there wasn't any tray there, it would be great. You could just have a pile. And we also get a pile here we'll keep clean with the loader. Anybody who runs a chipper knows there's some scraps come out the back. The trouble is they don't always come out. If it was on an angle, they'd all come out. Then we could just pick it up with the loader. So now we have to do both. We have to clean it by hand, then pick it up with the loader. You swing the loader in. You swing the fingers in like this with the loader. You lay it on the ground. You pull out the junk, all the wood, bark, crap. If you don't do it, you do 2 or 3 loads. Whatever you have for change, you're going to be breaking them. There's too much work going on. It'll do as much work just moving around the junk as pulling the wood in. So you don't want to have a pile of stuff there. We keep it clean. We got a little tool to get in there with. Especially at night when you're done, you have to get in there and clean that out, because that'll freeze up and jam up the wheels for the next day. If it's going to be this kind of a warm to cold weather, we make sure. But I always clean it out at least once a load. If there's any reason to shut the chipper off in the middle, I'd grab my tool. I don't know where it is right now, but there's a tool I made. Looks like a little hoe, with a real thin hoe. Get in there and pull the stuff out. So that's it. That's about it. Think of any more smart stuff here. This is the accumulator. It's a whole 20,000 psi. It only goes up to roughly 500. I think we're at about 500 now with the gauge. We're a little under 500. So here's what you do with this valve. One guy's on the other side. It's going to take 2 people. Really have to have 2 people. You can't do it another way. So you'd get in trouble if you pulled the valve and locked it up. Tried to run over here and do that. One of my guys tried it once. Somebody's over on that side. They hold the valve. You open this valve up. You open this up while they're holding the pressure valve, and you'll see the pressure go up. You set it where you want it. It's a little high. It's fine, because you can always lose the pressure yourself. After it's charged, you can open up and let pressure out to bring it back to 500 or so. But one guy's over there holding that top lever, and with all the other levers in place, so that's powered up, obviously. And he's holding that top lever, pulling it, and this guy on this side is opening the valve to get more pressure. That's only if you have a problem with the feed being too tight or too loose, pushing down too much on the wood, or too light where it's just kind of rolling on the top, not sucking the wood in. And usually, people who run big chippers know this, that it's usually not anything but the dull knives. And running with dull knives is just a losing thing anyway. If you have sharp knives, it takes very little to pull the wood in. In fact, if there's no wheels at all going, it'll suck the wood right in with sharp knives. And if they're super dull, nothing's going to push the wood in. It tries to beat the wood like a hammer, and then everything starts to break. And putting more pressure on it, or stronger chains or any of that, is not the answer. You have to just change the knives when they're dull. Sharpen them each load. We give them a little touch up at least once a load, sometimes twice if it's muddy in the springtime. I think we've gone as much as 3 or 4 times in one load to touch up the knives when it's muddy, or if there's frozen stones on the wood. Otherwise, we've gone as much as 10 loads with one set of knives on a nice day with frozen ground and clean wood. That's it. Closing up here.